My name is Stacy Smith. I'm the director of the Media Diversity and Social Change Initiative here at USC Annenberg. And our goal with our initiative is to change the landscape of entertainment, both on screen, behind the camera, using financial data, as well as exposing the barriers and impediments that face women and people of color in entertainment. Today, we have a really exciting, I think, panel talking about an issue that we've been briefly discussing and dancing all around in the last two conversations. And the central question that we're going to be talking about today in this panel and for about 20 minutes, because I'm going to end it a little early so we can go to questions and make sure there's time to engage with the panelists. The central question for this discussion is, where is the next talent pool coming from? And what's interesting about this question is that there's a stark binary or contrast being set up, particularly in this country, that should provide for a very lively conversation about the answer. So on one hand, the answer to this question, where's the next talent pool coming from, isn't very surprising. America is more diverse than ever. 37% of the total U.S. population is considered underrepresented, okay? Kids under the age of 5, 49.9% come from underrepresented groups. And then Anoki and I are still 50% of the population and representing females on the first three panels today, right? And 47%, thank you, Mark, 47% of the workforce. So the United States is changing dramatically. And yet, the face of leadership in this country, or the workforce in profitable industries of technology, finance, business, entertainment, isn't changing. So we have some very depressing facts I just want to review first, as I typically present depressing facts, so I apologize in advance for bringing down the very lively conversations we've been having. Leadership in business, 95.2% of all Fortune 500 CEOs are men, 2014 data. Fortune 1000 CEOs in finance and insurance are men, 98.7%. In STEM, only 24% of the workforce is female, and according to Google Division Workplace Demographics, only 17% of Googlers working in tech are women. 1% of the tech staff are Black, and 2% are Hispanic. And then in entertainment, something it's been commented on today, we're going to talk about it at this panel as well. I don't have to tell this crowd, only 2% of directors of the top 100 motion pictures last year were women. Across 600 films over the last 6 years, there were only 2 African-American women helming those profitable pictures. People say television's better, but only 12% of women are directing episodic primetime TV, and 19% are directing are underrepresented directors in primetime TV. So we have a very interesting setup here if we think about the next talent pool. And this lack of diversity is actually very surprising. Why? If you go to Catalyst, if you go to Pew, if you go to McKinsey, several reports have made the business case for diversity. Diverse boards featuring women, people of color, better financial performance, can leverage talent in ways that are meaningful. They can increase innovation and group performance of the company, and they actually reflect the marketplace demographically and of ideas. So, if leadership begins with talent recognition, one attribute that seems to be important in third space competencies is identifying and cultivating diverse talent, both new talent horizontally that are coming up and about to be on the workforce, and as well as retaining, promoting, and mentoring women and people of color throughout the management and pipeline up through senior leadership. Our two panelists represent these two ends of the continuum. On my left, immediately, we have Mark Greenberg, the president and CEO of Epix, a joint media venture of Viacom, Paramount, Lionsgate, and MGM. Over 30 years of experience in the cable industry, and at Showtime, 17 years, EVP of Strategic Planning and Development in Digital Media. More close to home, he's on our board of counselors, and he's one of the generous supporters of the Media Diversity and Social Change Initiative. On Mark's left, I have Anoki Desai. Phenomenal student, business admin major at USC, minor in applied computer security and digital forensics, vice president of Women in Tech, Girls in Tech at USC. I changed it, sorry. Yeah, and then also the president of the Digital Forensic Club at USC. So, esteemed panel, first, Mark, I want to start with you. And we've worked together for about a year on issues pertaining to diversity and entertainment. And you fit that very narrow profile of leadership of companies around the world and globally right now. That white male, certain class prototype. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the genesis and reasoning behind your decision to support and encourage diversity among your employees and kind of over the course of your career.
Well, it's a simple question with a very long, complex answer, but I'll try to be somewhat reasonably succinct. When I left HBO in 1989, I went to Showtime. We had an organization that was in somewhat of disarray, mergers between different companies, clearly a lack of talent, lack of thinking. And the former CEO, who has since passed away, Tony Cox, had a firm belief in diversity. And many things that we talked about here, and Bill knows him well, where Tony was a very charismatic individual who really believed that it starts out, the biggest assets of your company go up and down your elevator every night. Well, maybe not in LA, but in New York. And so what we had to come to grips with is what was going to be the culture of our company. And Tony believed that we had a lack of diversity in the organization. We, as a pioneer member of that committee, working with work-life issues, and I get to focus on trying to retain more women who we saw leaving our work employment. We invested 4 or 5 years. They were very talented, having children, and we were trying to find alternative work arrangements. We began aggressive programs in order to recruit, develop, and build an organization. And Tony did it for 2 reasons. One, it was the right thing to do, and 2, it was going to be good business. And on that premise, interestingly, a lot of the things that we did in diversity, for gay and lesbian members of our community in our Showtime offices, bringing a better percentage of minorities, higher quality, recruiting at business schools, as well as how we did the whole process of development, we saw an enormous change, not only in the organization, but the content and the programs that we were doing. Our marketing started reflecting a more multi-generational approach, and again, we grew the business. And we trailed, at that point in time, HBO by a significant level that we, over the next decade, started trying to close the gap and did. It was interesting because about 1.5 years ago, Stacy came to New York with Ernie in an Annenberg meeting, and we're sitting there, and I got to be part of that session, and Stacy was going to come out and talk about diversity of gender inequality and in the media space. And I'm like, hey, I've heard this presentation before. We've made big progress. I'm really proud that my work company is about 51% female, 41% minorities, and we think we've done a great job of building that organization. And then Stacy started showing some statistics that were just frightening, several that were really just shocking to me. The lack of women behind the camera. Now, we're not talking about the roles that they play in front of the camera, but behind the camera. Directors, producers, writers. And when you start seeing the lack of women and people of color in those roles, you realize that the content that was being created, and I looked at our own studios, because I'm selling to a multi-generational marketplace. Epix takes all the new release movies from Paramount, MGM, and Lionsgate, and we're selling them. And I become an outlet for in the second window, not theatrical, but in the pay TV world, competing with HBO and Showtime. And I realized we're having a shortcoming here. I'm underserving my marketplace, my demographics. Interestingly, in the African American community, we indexed 175% the national average. 55% of our audience is female. So I need to have content that's there. So we became a very active supporter of Stacy's work because our mission was, how do we start changing the pipeline? And that organic conversation was sitting down with the CEOs of studios, which we've done about 6 at this point. And it's been interesting to see that engagement, because this process is going to be one that takes an evolution of letting people understand that we have to build it from the ground up, because A, it is good business, and B, as Tony said, it's the right thing to do. So that's what our organization's focused on. I just want to make one other addition, if I may. And I was saying this on the break. You know, one of the things we think about from diversity is diversity has a broad context. And I always get upset when, and I did quote some statistics, that people make it a statistical thing because it reminds us of affirmative action. And this should not be affirmative action. This should be about how people think, how people behave. It's diversity of thinking. By the way, I would submit to you that millennials have a different thinking process than Gen X, Gen Y, and baby boomers. So the training that we do at Epix is that we train people not only how the management team works with millennials, but how millennials have to adapt and work with the Gen X, Gen Ys, because there's a whole different set of metrics and biases that are felt by those groups. And to bring them together is the only way you can get to that third space. Because right now we have a nomenclature problem, and their expectations and ours are radically different.
Anoki, since Mark mentioned the pipeline, you're about to enter the pipeline in technology. And so and given the statistics I shared a second ago, I'd like for you to maybe think about or walk us through how you got interested in technology, given that that's relatively counter-stereotypical to norms based on statistical data of the workforce. And then secondly, my second part to this question for you is, we've been talking about all morning these third space competencies, being collaborative, being empathic, being intellectually curious. Some of these soft skills. Could you walk me through how your soft skills, these third space competencies, might augment, finesse, or round out the hard skills that you've been learning about in tech, digital forensics, computer science?
Okay. Your first question was, how did I get into tech, or how did I get into what I'm into today? So every girl's dream when she's 6 or 7 is to be a princess, or, I don't know, be like a firefighter, or be a doctor or something. My dream was to be a spy. And that even goes to show with my current email, which is my first name and then a 007 at domain. I'm embarrassed to share that, but that's a fact. So my uncle actually gave me our family's first computer. It was one of those Mac desktops that was colorful and looked like an apple, and it was new and everyone wanted one, and I was so lucky to have a computer in my home. And after that, I just really had an affinity for technology. And once I came to SC, I declared my major as business, and I found out that our engineering program offers different minors like computer security and digital forensics, and that's just doing spy work in the real world. And I fell in love and declared those as my minors, and started a club on campus for forensics. And now we bring in recruiters from the big 4 like Deloitte, KPMG, EY, PwC, along with people from Mandiant and Strauss Friedberg. And I help my friends get jobs in the forensics world, because it's very tough to recruit for very niche jobs, but it's very important. So that's how I got into tech, I guess, my uncle. And your second question was, how do I combine my soft skills with hard skills? So surprisingly, there was only one spot for the internship that I got last summer with Ernst & Young in the cybersecurity practice. And 4 USC kids and 2 students from, I forget what other school, I think some school in Virginia, were competing for that one spot. And I ended up getting it because I was able to combine all the communication classes that I've taken, I've taken one in Annenberg and a bunch in Marshall, the School of Business. And I was able to market myself to the employers and share what I had to offer to the recruiters. And I think that's the only reason I beat out the other competitors. Was engineers are stereotypically known to have very poor communication skills, and so they can't sell the qualities they have to offer and the hard skills they have to offer, like coding and all the various programs we use, like NCASE and MPE Plus. And I was able to communicate what I had to offer to the employers, and it's very, people kind of, look at you because you're a female in the tech world and don't think you have a competitive edge. But my competitive edge was communication. And I'm grateful to have this job now that they offered me. And I signed in August with Ernst & Young. I'm excited to start.
Excellent. One thing I wanted to ask, and it was posed this morning, is where are the barriers? So now that we know that there are barriers, Mark, in specific, you work with quite a few media companies. Where do we see the impediments in terms of women? I mean, is it that they don't lean in? Is it that they're leaving to raise families? Or is it, given the whole cultural fascination with implicit biases and unconscious stereotyping? Or is it all of the above? And what have you seen other companies doing to try to deal with the demography of the United States and reaching those target audiences that companies are trying to reach?
It starts out with the recruiting process, and I think you've heard everyone touch upon it today. First of all, when you're recruiting to a very specific segment, you're trying to buy expertise, right? We're a startup. We launched 5 years ago. We started 6.5 years ago. We're about 85 people today. And so we're bringing in lots of expertise, and we're very unusual because we're a bimodal company. I have no middle management. I have a senior team and a lot of young entry-level people that are on the social media side and the tech side. And so for us, when you go to buy expertise, the large problem is you're buying into the biases of the pool you're fishing in. And so for us, that challenge is how do you change that paradigm and how are you able to find what's better talent. And I think several things you heard earlier in the day, we have our own metrics of trying to find people. Ernie defines it as the third space. We believe in that too. We give a simple metric as a T, right? I need people with technical expertise, but have the ability to have capacity to think broadly. So that recruiting process is the one that starts, and I think we're trying to find ways to overcome what's the implicit barrier that exists in that. For us, what we've adapted are things that I had done earlier in my career. So we do compressed work weeks, we do job sharing for women, work from home. I have 3 senior executive women on my team, and they're each working from home for one day. And I will tell you, I get more out of them the day they're home than the 4 days they're in the office. They recognize that as a privilege, and it's a no-brainer for me to give them that option because we're able to allow them to do that. And I think that's allowed me to retain talent, not only here at Epix, but even when I was at Showtime. So I think those are the things that one needs to do in order to be more effective. I do think for some women, there's no question that men and women speak differently. Men will interrupt, women will be polite. It's sort of, there's a lot of documentation that talks about that. And we have to figure out ways to make sure that those opportunities are there. My chief of staff is a woman that I worked for 20 years ago. She's enormously talented. And I try to bring senior women into the organization. And what we do is that there are 3 senior women in very critical roles, all have responsibility for mentoring other women. And I think a mentoring process at least helps open dialogue for younger women to how to navigate the pathway.
Anoki, I'm curious, when you were experiencing your internship and you were participating in all the different activities on site, what was the environment like, and how important was it to you to be in a diverse environment coming from USC, where this is one of the primary focus, right, of the school? We have a very diverse student body. How important was it for you to see that in accepting this job that you've taken and the experience of the internship that you had?
The internship was very male-dominated, no surprise. The entire practice, I flew out to Houston because that's where the main center is. How do I collect my thoughts? Everyone in the office was a male, but I was surprised to see half of them were white and half of them were not. And there were, I think, 2 other interns in the different departments in the cybersecurity division, and there were 2 other males from other schools. So I befriended them, but I was surprised to see I was the only female intern, and I didn't feel intimidated. I felt that if I could get a spot competing with them, I kind of felt better than them. I mean, I was the only female intern at that level. I think there was actually one female partner, but she got brought in from like audit or assurance, or and she was just starting off her technical work. But it was kind of important for me to find some other female in the office. So I actually talked to the partner, and we had lunch once, and she kind of comforted me, like, this is a relatively new department, so don't feel like you're the only girl here. I mean, it's us two, we gotta stick together, and we're gonna start recruiting more females. So I'm helping a few of my friends join that division. Mm-hmm. 1, for the friendship, but 2, because we do need more representation of women in STEM.
Well, and I think we've heard on this panel that there are several of the third space competencies that map right onto diversity, right? And they're a value of diversity. And I wanted to make sure that we had at least a few minutes left over for questions, because I think that the future does not look like the present. And to be astute in thinking about business, engineering, entertainment, and the markets that are being served, there has to be more diversity in the pipeline and in senior leadership positions. So let me open it up for 5 minutes of questions for those of you that might want to ask the panelists about their experiences. Yeah.
Or getting people interested in the industry. I think that it seems like it's a combination of both. And I know I work in the advertising business, so we have more, hi. We have more women than men, but not necessarily at the senior level. Mm-hmm. But I think just the diversity in talent is one of the challenges we have. And I know, like working with different schools, I think we need to get people for mine interested in advertising, people that are African American or Hispanic that aren't necessarily interested in it. So it's not that we don't want to hire them, because we do. We just don't get them sort of through the door. And I think it's incumbent upon us to get people interested in our industry. So if you're talking specifically about women behind the camera, I think, or women in the tech industry, it's making it okay for them. So you have to be the trailblazer, and, Catherine Bigelow has to be the trailblazer.
Well, and Catherine Bigelow is a trailblazer. There's no question. Here's the interesting thing. We got asked this question once. Stacy, Ernie, and I were sitting there with one of the studios. They said, "Isn't that a pipeline issue?" And they said, let's talk about who's coming out of Annenberg and who's coming out of the film school. USC, at Columbia, at NYU, at Newhouse. And you know what the interesting statistic is? There are more women in Annenberg than men. There are as many women at the film school as men. And the problem is they get siphoned off. And the men get pushed to making big motion pictures, and the women get pushed to making documentaries. Now, is that self-selecting? I argue not. I think what's happening is we have a structural issue that's going on. Now, what was interesting is in Stacy's study, and this is the part I find most fascinating, is when you take the top 100 movies, and so let's assume for a moment that women do reasonably well as best actress in supporting roles within some reason. It hasn't really changed. About 35%.
Half a century.
Right, half a century, 55, but 30. Look, you get a movie like The Expendables, right? It's going to have 10 men, maybe 1 woman. So there's going to be some kinds of movies that are being made. And my argument is, well, they're making that movie because a guy's writing it, not a woman, right? You don't get the Nancy Myers, thank you, who's writing a more women's-oriented movie with a more ensemble cast. And then the studio guys go, oh, chick flick, can't put money behind it, right? And so what happens is we press down upon the opportunity. By the way, Tyler Perry does a lot of women in his roles, highly profitable, highly successful. So we said to them, we look at the top, not we, Stacy looked at the top 100 movies, and they looked at speaking parts, not just the big 4 roles, lead actor, lead actress, supporting, but you have 1 word. And so let's say you're the sergeant in the police station, and you go, book him, always a white guy. What's the percentage? Like 90% of these tangential roles, unless it's a housewife, is a male. That's crazy. You know why? The studio guys looked at that and went, wow, we never pay attention to that. There's some line producer who's a guy who's hiring more guys to do the role. So I do think we have structural issues of how do you make it okay, and where's the opportunity to get created? Because the pipeline, this university is making sure there's a balance. So for us, employing people on our team, which is a separate issue, I would say to you as a startup, my vision for the company was multi-platform. John Taplin and I have had this debate, what's the world of digital in this? And we have bought all in. So I have a very energized group that has a passion for wanting to be there. I will tell you, I do not hire anyone who doesn't have a passion to want to be in this space. Because if they're not passionate about what goes on, your problem is you can't break through the barriers. And that's one of our challenges.
Great question. I think that, too, if you look at the literature on recruitment, you might have a diverse pool on a list to hire. But if it's not in an ecosystem of diversity, it's not going to make it. And what the NFL is doing with the Rooney Rule is actually really interesting, requiring if there's an outside hire for that list to consider underrepresented candidate on that list. And there's a commitment to thinking about how do we populate head coaches to look a little more diverse, right? But I think without...
But I have to stop you.
Okay.
So, because the Rooney family was part of the problem.
Indeed.
Okay, so we just finished a documentary called The Forgotten Four, and there were 2 black athletes here in LA that played for the LA Rams and 2 that played for the Cleveland Browns. And interestingly, the 2 that played for the LA Rams unfortunately went to the other school across town, but played the same backfield and baseball team with Jackie Robinson and were reviewed to be a better baseball player. And what was fascinating was the NFL was an integrated league when it first started. It was 1933 that there was a gentleman's agreement co-led by the owner of the Washington Redskins and the Rooney family, because they were afraid if the economy was bad, that there were black athletes taking white athletes' jobs, and they thought the union employees wouldn't allow them to work at those stadiums if that happened. And so what's interesting is they didn't agree with what they did, but they came around. And you give the Rooney family credit for at least acknowledging their mistakes, which is what, in our storytelling, we like to do, is saying the elevation of the idea of the positive outcome of where you go.
Okay, yeah, right here.
Your discussion about the structural problem points out, I think, one of the major problems we see in diversity. Diversity has become a very overworked word, in my opinion, and has multiple meanings to many different people. I think we have to change the conversation from diversity, which people think of as numbers,
Right.
to equity.
Agreed.
And I think your point really illustrates the significance of thinking about equity rather than simply thinking about celebrating diversity as an achievement in and of itself. It is a means to the end, but the end is really the equality of opportunity to have the equity in the environment in which you're working.
We're in violent agreement.
Yeah. Last question.
How do you get white guys in suits to self-discover their need to hire diversely? Because you're never going to cram it down their throat, something that's not their idea.
Well, it's unusual that I'm wearing a suit, and only because of Ernie did I wear one today. Normally, he'll tell you I show up in jeans to most of my meetings. When I left Viacom 8 years ago, I swore I'd never wear a suit again, and hopefully not a tie. But it's interesting. I think this is an organic process. I think you have to be grassroots. We've made progress with some of the studios hiring more women directors. We're interviewing women directors. We're getting them to realize that in the tangential opportunities for actors or actresses in this case, that they're now considering more of that. And I think what happens is there's an economic model that will ultimately show. And one of the things that we work with Stacy on is how do we find that economic model for them? I learned very early on at Showtime that we could see in the marketing, in the brand positioning, that we had a more holistic view and we grew the business. So it was a cause and effect. And we're trying to show the same thing for the studio owners because that's there. I will say that there have been, over time, women in charge of creative decisions at studios. And I will say they fared no better than their male counterparts. So I think that attacking this from a real organic process of saying it's just the whole thing, not just that one job, is the only way that we can see long-term change. and really build it from the bottom up. I will say that for the most part, we've had a very receptive audience. Now, maybe they're being polite to us, but they follow up with Stacy and Ernie all the time, acknowledging what kind of changes, because they didn't realize. And so sometimes in that awareness, you can make some strides. And I think for me, at the end of the day, I'll be able to put better content out. I'm paying them millions and millions of dollars. So my belief is that as the customer, right, I buy from my studios, and I buy from 5 of them, that if they hear from me that this is important to me as a customer, because I'm selling to customers, they have to pay attention.
I think that's the best way to end the panel. Please join me in thanking our panelists.